I want to talk about really three things today. The first are, as I say in the title, perverse incentives that are financially attractive to employers. Whether or not they make sense for any employer, that's for the employer's judgment. The third issue that I want to talk about is the anti-retaliation provision of ERISA and how that may affect how you decide to structure your workforce in response to the ACA's requirements. I want to go through some of the same material that Bill just went through in order to help people to understand this first perverse incentive that was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal about 3 weeks ago. So an employer has to offer the ACA compliant insurance or else faces the penalty, right, beginning January 1st. And we're going to talk about large employers here, and we're going to talk about really large employers. Really large employer would be 100 plus employees. So for everybody from between 50 and 100 employees, you have to offer these three categories that Bill just spoke about. He did not further describe minimum essential coverage that describes essential health benefits, and that's the next slide. The essential health benefits are there it is. This law, the administration has dropped the first two words of this law, Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Those two laudable goals are fundamentally in conflict. To offer patient protection, and at least in this slide describes the 10 essential health benefits that every insured plan, an employer between 50 and 99 employees must offer. These are the kinds of things that we would generally expect to be in an insurance policy. But the administration's rules, by and large, have made plans more expensive by requiring that every plan cover more things than they did historically. And that obviously runs into conflict with the affordability issue. The more stuff you offer, somebody's got to pay for that. But talking about now, I was just checking on my phone. This regulation was issued on January 2, but that's a Wednesday. So, yeah. But it was January 2nd when everybody's got their eye on the ball, right? There's an exception for employers with more than 100 employees. There's an exception for any size employer that self-insures. No requirement that a really large employer or a self-insured plan offer essential health benefits. Just has to offer the types of minimum essential coverage that Bill talked about in his presentation, which are not terribly well defined. So what difference does this make? And then minimum value is the 60% that Bill talked about. The plan has to cover at least 60% of the expected costs. And the 9.5% affordability that Bill just talked about. So again, what difference does it make? Well, here's the difference that it makes. And Bill was alluding to it, but here's, again, I'm not saying this is attractive for every employer. It is attractive to some employers, especially I would think it would be attractive to employers that have a lot of minimum wage employees. The employees can cause you to get a penalty if you don't offer minimum value coverage, if you don't offer affordable coverage. But because a really large employer doesn't have to offer essential health benefits, and because a self-insured plan does not have to offer essential health benefits, you can offer a really, what's called a skinny policy, a policy that does not cover a whole lot, that meets, but it still is going to pay for 60% of the expected costs. Because it's cheap, it's going to meet the affordability requirement. And what does this mean for your employees? This means that now they're no longer eligible to participate in the premium tax credit on the exchange. And now the IRS doesn't like this, but there's only so much IRS can do about this. So again, I'm not saying this is for everybody by any stretch. There are certain circumstances where it may be attractive to people. And so for those people who are self-insured or who want to be self-insured, for those people more than 100 employees, there are some ways around the general requirements. So here's the perverse incentive number one. And we've done this for a few clients, not to cover their whole workforce, but to cover certain portions of their workforce under unusual circumstances that make sense for those employers. Now here's perverse incentive number two. I was sitting in a collective bargaining meeting 2 years ago for a client with about 75 employees, and they've been self-insured for a long time. They are an old line manufacturing firm, haven't hired anybody in forever. Generally the claims experience is pretty bad. The cost of the insurance is really bad. The experience with the reinsurer, and it's the first one I had run into, they have two cases. One, they cannot get reinsurance at all for one of their employees. Two, the second employee, the reinsurance kicks in after $250,000. So for a company of 75 employees, though, those can be catastrophic costs that you can't get reinsurance for. And why go self-insured? Well, you can imagine what the premium rates would be with an insured plan. So I've been trying to think up a win-win for the employee and the employer, and here's a win-win that makes perfect economic sense for the employer and the employee. One, you've got this employee that you can't get reinsurance for, but you've got a 60%, 70%, 80% policy where the employee is going to have to pick up 40, 30, 20% of the claims, right? Well, you can continue, and you would continue to offer the same insurance to this individual that you would offer to everybody else, but it would be in the employer's self-interest to pay the employee's cost to go out and get what's called a platinum policy on the exchange that would pay 90% of the expected costs. And generally, most employees are required to contribute something towards health insurance. Why doesn't the employer pick up 100% of the employee's cost to go out on the exchange? There's no penalty, assuming that the coverage currently meets minimum essential coverage, minimum value, and affordability. The employee's allowed to go out on the exchange. So you're trading $250,000, $500,000 up claim in return for paying $10,000 to $20,000 a year in premium expense. Employee gets better coverage because they're paying now no premium dollars. They're paying less out of pocket because they're getting a better policy that you're offering. And you've traded the claims experience in return for something. And this is my hypothetical. You're going to pay you got to make it worth the employee's while. So pay the 100% of the insurance on the exchange. This screws the taxpayers, but this law is designed to do that in part. Right now, 23% of Americans receive their health insurance through Medicaid, and this law is designed to increase the percentage of people on Medicaid. Again, is this something that something to consider? Economically, it is in the employee's interest. Economically, it is in the employer's interest. And if you structure it the right way, it doesn't violate any law. So, again, something to consider. And then we'll finish actually close to on time. Just the last issue here. You only have to provide coverage under the ACA to people who work 30 or more hours per week, and there's one of these Friday regulations that's issued that's about 40 pages thick that describes how to count this, and it's for the average employee, it's real simple, but that keeps us employed to figure out on the margins, of course. Keeps lawyers and insurance and accountants busy otherwise. And obviously, this is going to provide incentive to employers where you have people working in that 25 to 35 hour a week range. Can you get that done with less than 30 hours a week? Now this is, I don't think my PowerPoint person knew that Jimi Hendrix died before 1974, but let's just go with it. ERISA was passed in 1974 in response to all sorts of issues, largely actually related to the bankruptcy of the Studebaker car manufacturing company. But there's an anti-retaliation provision in here that I've quoted in part. Cannot discriminate against a participant for the purpose of interfering with their benefit. And where this really first this law got some notoriety, Continental Can, back in the 70s, had this very sophisticated computer program that would tell HR when people were getting close to eligible for early retirement subsidies, and it would instruct the HR people to fire those people shortly before they got eligible for early retirement subsidies. This law prohibits that, among other things. The question, though, so if you have an employee today who's working more than 30 hours, and you reduce that person's hours below 30 hours, in order to not pay insurance benefits, can you do that? Under the literal terms of the statute, no. A lot of people who practice on the management side of the employment bar, like I do, don't think this is going to be an issue. I think they're crazy. The interesting issue though, is that it applies only to current participants, does not apply to people who are not yet participants. We've got an interesting situation with an employer out a little bit east of here who only gives benefits to people who work regularly scheduled 32 or more hours per week. And they want to know how do they come into compliance. So the first question is, well, how many hours are your people working? And again, everybody who's regularly scheduled fewer than 32 hours doesn't get benefits regardless of the number of hours they work. Well, on average, these people are working close to 40 hours because somebody's sick and somebody else picks up a shift, because you have attrition and you don't replace people, and so you need current part-timers to take the place of these people. So since they don't provide insurance right now, they are in the process of making sure that these part-timers get below 30 hours per week by the end of the year so that they don't have to provide the insurance. And under the literal terms of the statute, that should not be a problem. Once you get to January 1, 2014, and the beginning of the plan year after January 1, is that going to be an issue? So the people that you think are part-time right now and that you do not intend to provide benefits for, you'd better make sure that they really are working fewer than the X number of hours that you think they're working. Because what you're going to run into is a class action, this law requires that a successful plaintiff get their attorney fee paid by the defendant. So that's where that's who's going to bring these, is going to be plaintiff's lawyers looking to get paid by you. So as you manage your workforce, and again, it is an open question whether or not you can reduce hours to someone who's currently a participant. There are obviously no lawsuits under this yet, but you can see under the plain literal terms of the statute that it would prohibit reducing hours for the sole purpose of reducing insurance benefits once you get to next year. So just one more thing to think about in your day when you don't have anything better to consider, and stuff like this. So I'll be happy to, I think we're about ready to go to a break, Joe, and happy to answer any questions during the break and afterwards.